Because this is from Monday. No, yeah, this is from a while back.
The Holy Gospel according to Luke, the 9th chapter.
Glory to you, Lord.
Now about 8 days after these sayings, Jesus took with him Peter and John and James and went up the mountain to pray.
That's the first one.
And while he was praying, the appearance of his face changed, and his clothes became dazzling white.
So there's the link.
Suddenly, they saw two men,
I think she
Moses
forwarded
and
the wrong
Elijah,
one.
talking to him. They appeared in glory and were speaking of his
That one?
departure, which he was about to accomplish
That's a
at
different one.
Jerusalem. Now Peter and his companions were weighed down with sleep, but since they had stayed awake, they saw his glory and the two men who stood with him. Just as they were leaving him, Peter said to Jesus, "Master, it is good for us to be here. Let's make 3 dwellings, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah,"
I think that should be at the.
not knowing what he said. While he was saying this, a cloud came and overshadowed them, and they were terrified as they entered the cloud. Then from the cloud came a voice that said, "This is my son, my chosen. Listen to him." When the voice had spoken, Jesus was found alone, and they kept silent, and in those days told no one any of the things they had seen. On the next day, when they had come down from the mountain, a great crowd met him. Just then a man from the crowd shouted, "Teacher, I beg you to look at my son. He's my only child." Suddenly a spirit seizes him, and all at once he shrieks. It throws him into convulsions until he foams at the mouth. It mauls him and will scarcely leave him. I begged your disciples to cast it out, but they could not. Jesus answered, "You faithless and perverse generation, how much longer must I be with you and bear with you? Bring your son here." While he was coming, the demon dashed him to the ground in convulsions. But Jesus rebuked the unclean spirit, healed the boy, and gave him back to his father. And all were astounded at the greatness of God. While everyone was amazed at all that he was doing, he said to his disciples, "Let these words sink into your ears. The Son of Humankind is going to be betrayed into human hands." But they did not understand this saying. Its meaning was concealed from them, so that they could not perceive it. And they were afraid to ask him about this saying. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ.
Four friends go up on the mountain for a little camping retreat. Jesus and his disciples have just come off a whirlwind tour of teaching the crowds, healing those who are ill, and hosting a miraculous picnic for 5,000 people in the Galilean wilderness. It's time for a break. It's time to take a little breather after so much flurry and activity. And so, Peter, John, James, and Jesus go up the mountainside to be alone together, to relax together, and to pray. Probably, instead of roasting weenies over the fire, they enjoyed fish sandwiches. And it's less likely that their fingers were gummy from marshmallow goo and sticky s'mores, but the residue from dried figs or dates. But still, it was just an ordinary camping trip among friends, until the last story was told, the last log laid on the fire, and their yawns overtook them in the darkness. And then suddenly, it was nothing like an ordinary camping trip at all. Jesus alone remained awake. And while he was praying, the appearance of his face changed, and his clothes became dazzling white. Suddenly the disciples saw two men, Moses and Elijah, talking to him. The same Moses who had encountered God on the mountainside too, about 1,500 years earlier, in the fiery flame of a burning bush that refused to be consumed. The same Elijah who had encountered God not in the blazing bonfire, but in the sound of sheer silence on the mountainside, about 800 years earlier. These powerful prophets out of Israel's ancient past now appear alongside Jesus in his glittering, altered state. In the blink of an eye, the disciples aren't sleepy at all, but wide awake and witnesses to God's glory. Or as one translation puts it, all at once they woke up and saw how glorious Jesus was. They came fully awake to how this was no longer an ordinary camping trip, because their beloved rabbi was no mere ordinary man, but bright as lightning and surrounded by glory. And just then, a cloud came and overshadowed them, which can be scary when you're up in the mountains, even at regular times. But from this cloud comes a voice. This is my son, my chosen. Listen to him. Just like that, Jesus, the everyday, the familiar Jesus, was found alone. The disciples kept silent in those days about what they had seen. But how long must they have lain quietly in the dark on that midnight mountainside, staring up at the sky and marveling what they had just seen? The next morning, it's time to strike camp to hike back down the mountain. When they arrived, immediately the crowds swarmed them once again. The work of teaching and healing comes rushing back around them. And at the very front of the crowd is a frantic father shouting to Jesus with the desperation of any parent who has a child who's gravely ill. Rabbi, I beg you, look at my son, my only child. The father describes how his son is seized, how he foams at the mouth, and how he suffers from terrible convulsions. All obvious symptoms of the tonic-clonic seizures that were deemed to be caused by evil spirits for centuries in many cultures. Today, a doctor would likely diagnose the boy with the neurological disorder epilepsy, a condition for which, to this day, there are treatments, but no known cure. It's no wonder Jesus' disciples couldn't cast it out either. But Jesus can. He does look at that little boy. He looks at him in the sense of examining him like a doctor. But Jesus also looks at the boy with compassion, with favor, with the words from the night before still ringing in his ears. This is my son. Here is another father, with his own dark cloud hanging overhead, with his own beloved son. Jesus rebuked the unclean spirit, healed the boy, and gave him back to his father. And all were astounded at the greatness of God. On this Feast of the Transfiguration, we see the stark contrast between the majesty of the disciples' mountaintop experience and the everyday humdrum, workaday world of life lived on the plains. On one hand, we have a mystical midnight revelation a once-in-a-lifetime kind of occurrence, a vision and a voice. Short though my time as a pastor has been, I have already been privileged and blessed beyond belief when others have trusted me with their own fleeting encounters with the supernatural. Visitations in dreams from loved ones long dead. The dark tunnel and bright light that people frequently describe when they have a near-death experience. The quiet yet unmistakable whisper of a Holy Spirit in their minds and in their hearts. These aren't normally the kinds of occasions people bring up in casual conversation with just anyone. Just like the disciples, who kept silent in those days and told no one any of the things they had seen. The divine encounter can be so profound, so life-altering, so utterly other than our normal life. Some of us may never share these incidents with anyone at all, but guard them closely in our hearts. God's radiant glory has shone forth in our lives in a unique, unspeakable way. And we realize with awe and astonishment we have been its grateful witnesses. Contrast that with the unremarkable commonplace scene on the plain. A thronging crowd, a desperate father, a dangerous neurological disorder. We too know the rush of the crowds in evening traffic or the Saturday grocery line. We too know the clamoring demands that others place upon us in overflowing email inboxes and our work-obsessed culture that insists on productivity above all else. We too know the pain and anxiety of seeing a loved one saddled with troubles, cancer, depression, afflictions of all kinds. And we too know how badly we are in need of Jesus' healing hand. But do you notice when Jesus heals the boy and gives him back to his father, the text tells us that all were astounded at the greatness of God. Because God's glory isn't just confined to a one-of-a-kind mountaintop encounter or ethereal vision. God's glory can just as easily be found in every successful surgery. Every day we make it through without a drink. Every returning of a healthy child to their parent. Because God's glory is manifest in blessings that are everyday and ordinary, every bit as much as the ones that are remarkable and extraordinary. But we still haven't told quite the whole story. There are still 2 more verses Jesus has to share with us. Let these words sink into your ears. The Son of humankind is going to be betrayed into human hands. This is the hardest part of all for us to grasp, even today. Of course, God's glory is on the mountaintop. And yes, God's majesty is also found on the plain. But equally, God's glory is evident in Jesus' betrayal, in his trial, in his crucifixion, and in his death. It can feel impossible to see God's glory in double-crossing, in a sham legal hearing in crooked court, in torture, and in an agonizing and humiliating death. Even the disciples did not understand this saying. Its meaning was concealed from them. Yet hidden there too are the majesty and magnificence of our God. Because at the cross, we can truly say with the psalmist, how precious is your steadfast love, O God. In the routine ups and downs of our days, God walks with us. Sometimes God may visit us miraculously on the mountaintop. And sometimes God goes before us in our toughest trials and accompanies us to death, even death on a cross. Our road is not always easy, but we do not go it alone. And whether high or low, anywhere in between, if we keep our eyes open along the way, we may just glimpse the greatness and glory of God.